Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. The Soviet Union fired back today at angry and humiliated Reagan administration officials, the ones who have been complaining that the Russians played dirty by using beautiful women to seduce young Marines and bug the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. The Soviets' answer today was a version of that old refrain, "So's your old man." Wyatt Andrews was there to hear it.
It was a game of political one-upmanship for the Soviets, a James Bond show and tell of how Americans are said to spy on Russian diplomats based in the United States. This narrow gray tube is alleged to be a high-tech listening device American agents disguised as insulation and then built into the windows of the new Soviet embassy in Washington. These hollow bricks were said to house a system which transmitted bugged Russian conversations along beams of infrared light.
Types vary, from bulky rooftop crossbeams and building blocks, crammed with listening equipment, to miniature listening devices, smaller than a pencil planted in walls.
The Soviets spiced the press conference with bits of righteous indignation, calling American spying a violation of international morality and human rights. At the same time, they never flatly denied American charges of Soviet spying against the United States. The message was clear. As long as President Reagan is going public with espionage, the Soviets were saying, we can go one better.
The Soviet side has always treated spying with caution and without indulging in inflamed passions. We haven't dramatized this, but now the actions of the U.S. side cannot go unanswered.
The calculated bursts of outrage from the Soviets are intended to influence Secretary of State Shultz's visit to Moscow, which begins Monday. The Soviets would like today's show and tell to cool any American outcry over spying so that arms control will dominate the agenda by the time Shultz arrives. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Moscow.
Around Congress, some members jokingly have been calling Secretary of State George Shultz Winnebago George. That's because Shultz has insisted on going ahead with his planned meetings in Moscow next week, even though he might have to operate out of a mobile home because there is no security at the U.S. Embassy. No jokes in Congress late today, though. In a non-binding resolution this afternoon, the Senate urged Secretary of State Shultz to postpone his Moscow meetings until some kind of proper security can be assured. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev arrived today in Czechoslovakia, 3 days late. Slight cold was the official excuse, but CBS News chief European correspondent Tom Fenton reports that suspicions continue to run high that this was just a clumsy cover story.
Gorbachev appeared in fine form as he began one of the most delicate missions of his career. His problem, how to push his reform program here without destabilizing a government that has blocked all reforms for years. Czechoslovakia's authoritarian leader, Gustav Husak, seems uncertain how to handle this new-style Soviet leader who enjoys wide popularity in this country. For almost 2 decades, Czechoslovak people have lived under a regime that offers them goods in return for their silence. Food stores are so well stocked they even offer luxury items. But bookstores can only sell titles approved by the ultra-conservative government. Kafka's works are hard to find in the country of his birth. The Catholic Church is confined within its walls and so severely repressed that hundreds of priests have gone underground. They risk up to 2 years in prison for teaching religion or holding services in private homes. Thousands of people are still persecuted for supporting the liberalization program that was crushed by Russian tanks in 1968. A former journalist who now stokes a furnace thinks many Czechoslovaks have lost the nerve to ask for greater freedom.
They would like to make a change, but they still wait. Lots of them are waiting till the time where it is permitted.
Many of these people believe Gorbachev offers them the first real chance for a change in their lives since 1968. For the next few days, they will hang on every word he says. Tonight, there was an exchange of formal toasts at a state banquet. Tomorrow, he's expected to make a major foreign policy statement. There's speculation he will announce the withdrawal of some of the 80,000 Soviet troops that have been here since 1968. Tom Fenton, CBS News, Prague.
Startling and worrisome information today that a United States government employee at a top-secret nuclear facility sold documents and uranium to the Palestine Liberation Organization. The person had a top security clearance. Pentagon correspondent David Martin has details of uranium for the PLO.
A laboratory technician who worked in this nuclear weapons plant run by the Department of Energy was alleged to have sold uranium and classified documents to the Palestine Liberation Organization, considered by some to be a terrorist organization.
This particular individual had access into the most sensitive nuclear weaponry material that this country provides.
According to a report by the General Accounting Office, this same lab technician, whose name was not revealed, was also alleged to have raped young women and
sold cocaine, used cocaine, carried weapons onto the facility at which he worked.
According to one source, the FBI concluded in 1981 that the technician had in fact offered to sell uranium to the PLO, although there was no proof he ever delivered. Despite all these allegations, the lab technician continued to hold the department's second highest security clearance until just last year.
That memo was sent to the Department of Energy's security program, and it was misfiled and for 4 years set unattended.
The case of the lab technician is the most alarming of many lapses found in security at nuclear weapons plants. A radioactive material handler with the department's highest security clearance was arrested for driving while intoxicated and possession of marijuana, yet held on to his security clearance for 16 more months. A truck driver who transported plutonium and enriched uranium used heroin for 5 years before his clearance was suspended.
The Department of Energy is very, very far behind in conducting the reinvestigations which they need to do to assure themselves that their employees are trustworthy.
Like security at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, critics say security at this country's nuclear weapons plants is an accident waiting to happen. David Martin, CBS News, Washington.
The FBI tonight confirms it investigated the allegations against the lab technician, but the FBI says it found no evidence to support the claim that the man sold uranium to the PLO. A lot of questions being asked about an air crash in California. The Air Force said today that the civilian Hercules transport craft that crashed late yesterday at Travis Air Force Base northeast of San Francisco was under contract to fly cargo for the military. 5 crewmen died in the fiery crash. 4 were employees of the plane's owners, Southern Air Transport, and the 5th was on leave from the Air Force pending retirement. The plane was said to have been on a training flight. Southern Air Transport was owned by the CIA until 1973 and has been involved in secret supply flights for the Contras in Nicaragua. The FAA now is investigating a near miss between a Pan Am Express commuter plane and an Air Force C-141. It happened over New Jersey yesterday. The Pan Am plane took evasive action. That injured a flight attendant and a passenger. Both planes landed safely. Meanwhile, in Congress today, a House subcommittee heard that air traffic control mistakes are up 18% in the first quarter of this year alone. Peter Van Sant has been looking into our increasingly confused and dangerous skies.
The FAA had to admit today to a feisty and at times frustrated investigating committee that despite its assurances of safe skies, near misses are at record levels and air traffic controller errors are dramatically on the rise.
We wanted something to be done before people get killed massively and the whole system collapses.
The FAA revealed today that there were a record 866 near mid-air collisions last year, up from 758 in 1985.
There is need for improvement, and I am concerned about near mid-air collisions and mid-air collisions. Everybody in the FAA is concerned.
The problem? A jump in controller errors, resulting in jetliners flying too close together. There were 313 such incidents in the first 3 months of this year, compared with 265 during the same time last year.
I think the system is in very serious problems, and I would not be surprised if we see some tragedies occur in the future as a result.
More frequent controller errors are an embarrassment to the FAA, which had launched a program this year to reduce controller mistakes. CBS News has obtained a tape recording of a special telephone message normally accessible only to top FAA managers. On the tape, FAA Air Traffic Chief Keith Potts admits his concern.
Our goal was to reduce operational errors by 2%. What happened? Well, we've had a substantial increase. In fact, an 18% overall increase.
At a time when Congress has provided money to hire more controllers, one congressman charged today that the FAA is operating with fewer controllers this month than last.
We're 114 short of where we were a month ago, and that's ridiculous.
Experts say the best way to improve air safety would be for the FAA to hire back hundreds of controllers fired in 1981 during the PATCO strike. But that would take legislation, and sources say it would be vetoed by the man who fired those controllers, President Reagan. Peter Van Sant, CBS News, Washington.
A try for a miracle in medicine. Doctors today transplanted adrenaline gland cells into the brain of a 42-year-old woman. This in an effort to curb Parkinson's disease. The operation at Vanderbilt University was the first of its kind in this country. Parkinson's affects more than 1 million Americans and is a degenerative disease which results from the loss of a chemical that allows normal brain function. Doctors hope these transplanted cells will produce that missing chemical, stabilize the illness, and prevent it from worsening. There is much confusion and fear, of course, over the deadly AIDS virus and how it can be transmitted. As Doug Tennell reports tonight, one person went a long way toward calming some of those fears today.
The story behind this handshake is both a fairy tale and a nightmare. It is the story of a beautiful princess who met a man dying of AIDS. When Princess Diana inaugurated Britain's first ever AIDS ward in a London hospital today, she hoped to strip away the widespread misconception that you can get AIDS just by touching somebody.
Doctors say they hope that her action will once and for all dispel the fear that AIDS can be passed on by normal social contact between people.
Royal visits of any kind are normally nerve-wracking for their hosts, this one especially for Shane Snape, a male nurse on the ward who is also a carrier of the AIDS virus. The princess touched him too.
The lead up to Princess Diana coming was, will she or won't she wear gloves? And she didn't. I mean, I believe she wouldn't, and she's lived up to what I believe. She knew the facts.
Such is the AIDS stigma that patients in the new ward were afraid to be seen in photographs with the princess.
People who have been brave enough to be on camera have suffered some very unpleasant consequences, with their homes being ransacked and muggings and that, because unfortunately there is still a lot of prejudice.
In the only photograph of this royal audience, the AIDS patient remained unnamed, but the message from the princess was clear. Doug Tennell, CBS News, London.
And still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, a widely advertised toy, teenagers, and death in a California schoolyard. Also, the bittersweet story of a British nobleman, an ex-American GI, and a World War II legacy that was better left alone. A California teenager is dead tonight because a friendly game with a harmless high-tech toy took a fatal turn. David Dow has the story.
New toy laser guns such as these were the latest passion of 19-year-old Leonard Falcon and 3 friends. They would gather at night in this schoolyard to stalk and ambush each other in games of laser tag. Finally, a neighbor complained of armed prowlers at the school. When sheriff's deputies responded, the game turned to tragedy. Officials say one deputy suddenly was confronted by a crouching figure pointing a weapon. There was a flash. It was Leonard Falcon and his laser gun.
Up to the last second, he might have thought he was still playing a game when he confronted that deputy, and the deputy, not knowing that they were toy guns, took action.
The officer fired 2 shotgun blasts at young Falcon. A short time later, he was dead.
All I know is that he was shot, and I presume was by mistake by a policeman.
In the restaurant where Falcon earned the $45 for his laser gun set, his co-workers mourned him.
My prayers are also with that police officer that shot him. I mean, he's got to live with this the rest of life, knowing that it wasn't a real gun, it was a toy.
The unidentified officer who was involved in the shooting is a 6-year veteran who has since been counseled by a therapist. He has been placed on leave with pay, pending an investigation. The incident recalled another Southern California toy gun tragedy 5 years ago. A 5-year-old boy was shot dead by an officer who mistook a toy .38 for the real thing. So far today, there's been no comment from the laser gun manufacturer.
They're going to have to talk to the manufacturers of the toy. They're going to have to do something because, there's going to be somebody else going to get hurt.
Services for Leonard Falcon will be held Sunday. David Dow, CBS News, San Bernardino, California.
An unusual trial is underway in Massachusetts. The prosecution says it's a simple case of trespassing and disorderly conduct. The defense argues it will become an historic and unprecedented expose of the CIA in action. Richard Roth has been in the courtroom.
Hi, Ma.
It's like old times. Abby Hoffman, the yippie at 50, again a defendant with attorney Leonard Weinglass.
Never lost yet, never lost.
But it's not the 1960s. These aren't the Chicago 7. It's Northampton, Massachusetts today. A different time, a different place, and except for Hoffman, a different generation of defendants. A group that includes a college student who grew up in the White House, Amy Carter. They were arrested last November at the University of Massachusetts, charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct during a demonstration against the Central Intelligence Agency. By challenging the misdemeanor charges, they're trying to prove a point, trying to put the CIA on trial, as Amy Carter puts it, for crimes in Central America and elsewhere.
If we're found innocent, it's because the jury believes that we committed a small crime to uncover more serious crimes that the CIA is committing. So if they find us innocent, they find the CIA guilty.
We believe that this trial of the CIA in Northampton is of historic significance.
It's certainly striking some historic chords, generating demonstrations for the defendants and against them. And testing the patience of a local judge, frustrated by days of wrangling over jury selection.
Western New England remains independent, remains virtuous. I'm not saying that that will get them acquitted, but it will get them a hearing. That's all the Shays Rebels got.
Shays Rebels were a group of farmers who shut down the courts here in a protest 200 years ago, but then were crushed. And today it's not the rebel farmers the town remembers with a monument, it's the establishment. It's Calvin Coolidge who came here to retire.
How's it feel to be a law-breaking creep?
The defense has called in Daniel Ellsberg of Pentagon Papers fame and renegade CIA men to bolster the case against the agency. The prosecutors see the issue a bit differently. An ordinary case of trespassing, says one, with a lot of pretrial publicity. Richard Roth, CBS News, Northampton, Massachusetts.
President Reagan left Washington today and headed west, mostly for a vacation. He left behind a Congress still struggling with what many in Congress believe to be an unrealistic and deficit-feeding Reagan administration budget. As Deborah Potter reports, President Reagan has another real fight on his hands about this.
President Reagan's political problems intensified today when the House overwhelmingly rejected his budget, prompting him to search for a solution while on the road in Indiana.
I was wondering if it could replace Congress.
Only a handful of Republicans stood with the president today while accusing the Democrats of playing politics.
Everybody comes out opposed to the budget, but we raise it just with hopes of kicking the president around a little bit out on the House floor today.
A president that would cut child nutrition, throw out completely vocational education in a country who's talking about competitiveness. I say the president's budget is un-American.
The Democrats then passed their trillion-dollar budget, cutting defense by $9 billion and trimming domestic spending by another $9 billion. But some popular programs, including health care and education, would get more money. So the Democrats would raise $18 billion in new taxes.
My daddy taught me a long time ago that 20% of something is better than 100% of nothing. So if that's all I can get in the legislative process, I'm going to take it.
If you vote for this proposal, you're voting for more taxes. Take that home and tell that to your home folks.
And I call on the Congress to recognize their process for what it is, out of control and ready to be fixed.
The president said he's willing to discuss the budget with the Democrats, but clearly relishing their new political clout, they say they'll set the priorities. Deborah Potter, CBS News on Capitol Hill.
New quotes tonight about hush money paid to Jessica Hahn, the woman whose sexual encounter with television evangelist Jim Baker led to his resignation. Roy Grutman, the attorney for the PTL, or Praise the Lord Club, is quoted now as saying that the cash came from PTL donations. The Justice Department says money raised over the airwaves for the church and used for hush money could open the door for criminal investigation. The year was 1944. Hundreds of thousands of American GIs were in Great Britain. getting ready to finish off the Germans and end the war. In Ulster, England, one of those GIs left something behind that was never forgotten. Mark Phillips has the story of a search that began with a memory from 40 years ago and ended in a way that no one could have dreamed.
It was just another dying tree in the English countryside, but it began a story of irony and tragedy that has linked the lives of two men as different as men can be. The tree stands on the estate of an English aristocrat, the Marquis of Hertford, but the Marquis remembered some initials carved on the tree when the estate was used as an American convalescent center during World War II. R.J. 1944 U.S. Army, the carving said. Wouldn't it be nice, Lord Hertford thought, to find this R.J. and send him the carving as a gesture of thanks?
I just thought it was special, and I wanted to show a little bit of gratitude to the American forces who came over here and won the war.
Thousands of U.S. soldiers had been through here, patched up after battles, many waiting to return to the fighting. Lord Hertford publicized his search for the mysterious American soldier in the United States, offering a free trip to Britain to the real R.J. About 40 ex-GIs replied, but one letter had the detail to seem authentic. Well, gee whiz, it said. But what began as a story of curiosity, gratitude, and perhaps a little self-promotion has turned into a rather sad version of Where Are They Now? The real R.J. is a prisoner in the Moore County Correctional Facility in North Carolina. Robert Johnson, 63 years old, is serving a 120-year sentence for the gruesome murder of his 4 children in 1971. He was said to have been mentally unstable at the time. Now he's got nothing but time to think about what's become of his life and the English aristocrats in 43 years.
Well, we're quite different. He is a British nobleman, and seems like I've made a terrible mistake that has got me in prison.
It's sad to think that the young man of just 20 years old he was at the time he came here and fought on our side, it's sad to think what's happened to him since.
Other American GIs also carved their initials on the tree, but after his experience with R.J., the English aristocrat is in no hurry to track them down. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Ulster, England.
And that's the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather, thank you for joining us. We'll see you here again tomorrow night.
This is CBS.